Thank you, Dr. Gabby. So now we move to the third speaker of today. I welcome Dr. Michelle Sauer. She's online now, yes. This is Claudio.
Yes, I am. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes. Oh,
All
here
right.
you are. Welcome. Okay, so Michelle Sauer has a PhD, completed her graduate education at the Texas A&M University in microbiology, and then completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Baylor College of Medicine in genetics. She was by 2011 an assistant professor with grants, publications, and clinical studies. But she decided to create a new career, and she went to use her strength in editing and medical communication. So she gained a certification as an editor in life science, and has worked in research, development, and grantmanship, writing, and editing for the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, the University at Houston, and she also became, in 2024, she served as president of the American Medical Writers Association. At that time, she decided to move to a full freelance medical writer and editor career. And today, she can witness over $150 million in funding for the grants she has supported from a U.S. federal government. She's an expert in NIH funding, as well as the funding from the United States Department of Defense. So, Michelle, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Okay, I just want to make sure, can you see my slide? It should say effective
Yes.
strategies for scientific. Fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, well, I want to thank the Academy for inviting me here today. I very much enjoyed collaborating with Tiara, and one of the most fun things I have done is really been able to build a career about helping investigators write their grants. And at first, I thought it was a formula. And with time, I actually came to believe that it's more about storytelling. So I know that you are trained as a scientist, and many of us look in a grant and perhaps we're thinking of it like a manuscript. But the most compelling grants, and particularly in my experience as a reviewer, were a grant that read more like a story or a movie that really captured my attention. So, for those unfamiliar with the term storytelling, I'm going to define it as an art. Kiara talked about the art of grant writing, and it really is. It is a form of creative writing, because you want to develop the plot, which is typically your research approach, and your list of characters, your actors, are yourself and your experiments. And this plot really needs to capture your audience, which is your reviewer. So if any of you take a class from me now or in the future, these are the four main elements that I look at when I am editing a grant. The first part is about the organization, and the previous speakers have talked about all of the different elements of the grant. So as we gather our information, a part of it is organizing it in the right section. After that, I look at it to see if we could improve certain words to make it more compelling. How is the style written? Is it in the form that the reviewers are expecting? You don't want to give them any surprises. This is not a horror movie. It is a compelling movie. And the last step is grammar and punctuation and syntax. So that is the traditional form of editing that most people think of. But as a grant editor or grant writer, I usually focus on the top three elements. So if we're talking about storytelling in a grant, there's three main elements we're looking for. One, we really need to know your audience. And the previous speakers already talked about your reviewers and how you can find out more information about them and what they're looking for. The other area of storytelling is persuasion. How can we convince them that yours is the best idea, that you are the best scientist to do this, that the world will end if we don't do this research? And so that comes into the critical argument area. And that's going to mean that we made sure that the evidence, the peer-reviewed research, your preliminary research is very strong so that you have a strong critical argument. Now, we only have 40 minutes today. I actually teach a course that takes 10 weeks to go through a grant. So I'm going to go a little fast, but my contact information is at the end. There are several resources on this, and I'm always happy to answer questions. When we think of stories, these are the 4 elements. If you read your proposal, did I enjoy reading this? If it was really hard to read, you know, Kiara showed those 2 examples of just solid text versus a figure and subtitles. It needs to be enjoyable to read. That engaging component, many of us read differently. So the use of subtitles helps remind us what we're looking for. Bold, italics, all that formatting will help create the engagement experience. Is it imaginative? So is this something new, or is it just a repeat of what's been done? And how can you connect with the reviewers? Spending some time to know who is reviewing your grant can help you gauge what is best going to connect with them. One of the worst mistakes I made on one of the first grants I submitted was insulting the reviewer. I did not look at the reviewer panel. I was using a canine model, and I spent a whole page talking about how bad the mouse model was. You know who was on that panel? The mouse model author. So my grant got absolutely annihilated. So that is really important. You want to make sure that you can connect with the reviewers. When I resubmitted, I showed the value of the mouse and how my canine model actually was able to coordinate and improve upon those results. And it was taken more favorably the second time. Okay, there is a great TED Talk. You can Google it. It's by Andrew Stanton. And he talks about how to write stories. And what he tells you is that it's not a compelling story unless you're connecting emotionally, if you're connecting intellectually, and aesthetically. So aesthetically means making sure we have those subtitles and the figures and it looks great. Intellectually, do we have the content there? Is it solid? But the emotional part is what many scientists miss, especially junior investigators. You want to compel the person, and the best way to do that is to begin with a promise that you're not going to waste their time, that this research is innovative and it can make an impact. It's going to fit the criteria of what they are looking for. He also has this theory, and sometimes you might sense this. I really enjoy mysteries, and I like it when the storyteller drops these clues along the way so that you can anticipate, you almost know ahead of time who the bad guy is. In a grant, we want to drop these clues along the way, whether it's in the significance or in the beginning or the need statement. We're going to show that there's this problem. Then we're going to show our technology or our solution so that by the time we get to the end, the reviewer is already convinced this is the way to go. You've given them the elements of the 2 and the 2 so that they themselves know what the 4 is. So there are elements and the order that we present them is very crucial so that they are on this journey with us, that they know that the change or the data that we are presenting is fundamental and they anticipate what you're going to say next. If the reviewer can anticipate that this is the next logical step and that's your research goal, that's great. Then they're on board. They already believe that's what should happen. I wanted to pause for a second because there's some science behind what I am saying. We create anticipation because of the way that our brains work. So researchers, when they were actually looking at humans as they're reading stories, started to study how the brain lights up in different ways. The researcher's name is Yuri Hassan, and he's a neuroscientist at Princeton. He conducted this study by enrolling volunteers who underwent functional MRIs. The first MRI was to monitor and just record baseline levels. And then the volunteers were shown images and read stories. And he has a wealth of data that you can go in and find out. But there's some key elements that he found that should really hit home as we talk about this today. If you are looking in a grant and you see bullet points, it activates one side of your brain, okay? But if you see an image, it activates a different side of your brain. And you actually need both. The more of the brain that you can engage of your reviewer, the more likely they are to remember it. And that's what you want at the end. And so when we're talking about the two ways to present data, we really want to be specific in how we present it. Let me go with this way. If we are looking at bullet points, this area of the brain is activated. And that area of the brain is great when we are listing solid elements. So the main point is above. They typically forget these lower bullet points, okay? So you want to, whatever you're describing is above, and that the bullet points are just a little bit less important, okay? When you present an image, that is going to be a lasting image. The reviewer will remember the image for a very long time as compared to data that was presented with a bullet point. I'm not saying that bullet points aren't great, but I use them much less than I use images. I actually like to begin any grant process with thinking about all of the figures and tables that portray my story and figuring out the right order to put them in. When an image is there, it activates not only our visual perception, it also impacts your language processing and somehow, and sometimes depending on the image, even your different senses of taste and smell as the reviewer starts to recall in seeing that image. So all that to say, use images whenever you can. Don't use bullet points if you can avoid them. The science of storytelling in simple is that we want to make sure the reviewer knows the cause and effect and they're reading it the same way we do. We want to relate to that reader and so that they can pull upon their own experiences and get on board with what you are saying. And the simple story, as the other speakers have said, is always better than the complex story. I wanted to do a few turns just to make sure we're level set, that we're on the same page. So the protagonist is the main character who is typically good. The antagonist is the villain. We're going to set the scene in a grant. We're going to make sure they understand everything that other people are doing that's around in the field. Our conflict is typically what is that need or the gap that your research is going to fill. And the resolution should be what you are proposing. And I duplicated the slides. I apologize. Okay, so in grants, you are connecting what is known, what the field knows right now, what you found, and where you think the field is going. So you are that middle piece. You are the link. So the protagonist for a grant is typically whatever your process is, the biomolecule you're investigating, the new treatment, and you're hypothesizing that if your treatment is put in place, the world is going to be better. The protagonist, the main character, is going to change over time, right? And he's going to overcome that villain, that antagonist, because of your series of experiments. This is slightly different than the narrative arc of what we see in the manuscript. And I want to take a little minute so that we can compare and contrast. Typically in a manuscript, you're stating what your hypothesis was, you tell them what was done and how it was resolved. It's a lot about the what was done. There's this book by Luna. I put it here because I think she describes this beautifully. I highly encourage you, if you have time, to use it as a resource. As opposed to a grant, you are really just presenting, this is what was known, here's what happened, this is how we're interpreting it. Again, very clear kind of what, not usually as compelling. That's a whole different lecture on how to make the storytelling of a manuscript work. But we're focused on grant proposals today. So the stage, we're setting the stage. We're filling out everything that is known about it. And that brings us to your protagonist, what you're doing, the antagonist, what you're fighting against, what your challenges are. And then from there, we're resolving the conflict. We're showing how the world is better and how in the future, the resolution, everything is going to change. I won't spend any more time about the reviewers. That was well covered. But I want to spend some time here. While a manuscript describes the what, the grant describes the why. I actually act like a 2-year-old on most of the first calls with my investigators because as they're explaining to me what they want to do, I keep asking why. Why do you want to use this proposal? Why is this the best method? Why are you the best one to do this work? Why? And having young children myself, I know that that's annoying. But if you keep answering the why, you're going to be able to sell your argument. And so the more times that you can just keep questioning why, and when you read your proposal, if you're no longer asking why, then you know you've got it to a solid place. One of the elements that they asked me to work on specifically is more of the specific tools on how to actively write. The need statement is at the beginning of why we need to do this research. And there are 4 elements when I look at that first part of the grant, not the approach of what you're doing, but the first part of why you're doing it. I want to make sure that as much of that text as possible is in an active voice, that what we are doing is clearly addressing a gap or a need, that the evidence we have is strong. Someone asked in the chat about a preprint, and I want to address it here in case you're not following the chat. Preprints are wonderful. They're a great thing, a great way to get some feedback. But if you're referencing in a grant, be very careful. First, make sure that the solicitation allows it. Some organizers, some institutions, that when they're looking at grants, do not want preprints. Also, don't present it as if it has been peer reviewed. This is a preprint. It is different than a peer reviewed publication. So just make sure that you're putting the strongest evidence forward. I'm not saying not to use a preprint, just use it cautiously. The biggest element and one of the most fun parts is taking everything an author, an investigator has written down. And I actually encourage that. Just put everything on the page, all of the random ideas. And then we start to make it more precise and more concise. Let's go over these a little bit more. Here's some examples of active voice and why I feel it is so important to use it. Switching from an active voice gives us the opportunity, sometimes it reminds us, to be specific. Who is doing the work? In the first line, we have the outcomes will be analyzed with Bayesian methods. In the second, we have Dr. Smith will use Bayesian methods to analyze outcomes. It's more specific. It's stronger. It's more confident. It's usually also, the active voice is typically simpler. In the next example, we have the disparity in outcomes will be addressed by exploring multiple avenues. That is really vague. There is nothing a reviewer hates more than feeling like the author doesn't really know what they're going to do and they're just kind of giving vague language. Dr. Smith will use method A and B to analyze the disparate outcomes. That is much stronger. It's more confident. There's a great abbreviation. I have a teenager, and so I am getting familiar with more and more abbreviations. So TLDR stands for too long, didn't read. The active voice typically saves you words, and as you will find, often you're fighting against a word limit. So I rephrase this from the experiment was conducted by the research team over a period of 6 weeks to the research team conducted the experiment over 6 weeks. We saved a few words. Converting it to active voice is really the way to go. Saves you time, it's more confident, and it's simple. There are many different softwares that can help. I really enjoy the software Perfectit. This isn't an advertisement. Perfected and Grammarly are great because you can actually set the setting for it to look for passive voice and give you alternatives to change it to active voice. I much prefer grammar-specific software over generative AI. That's a whole separate topic, but I'd be very cautious whenever you're trying to use any type of chat GPT or generative AI to make your text. Reviewers can often see the difference between original text and generative AI. I know it's getting better, but just be really, really careful if you use it. I highly advise not to use it, but grammar software such as Perfected or Grammarly are really great ways to make sure your content is clear and concise. One other element I wanted us to look at is nominalization. It's a fancy word for the tense of a term. If it's nominalized, we're saying the implementation of the new protocol resulted in better outcomes. A simplified and changing it to an active verb is implementing the new protocol led to better outcomes. Again, shorter, more clear, stronger. So I often look for, and I can go through a Word document and hit Control F, of the. If I put in that text of the, you're going to find all of the nominalizations in your text. And each time you change that to an active verb, you're saving 2 words. It's a great, easy trick to do at the end, and it will very much strengthen your grant. One of the elements is the gap analysis. And typically when I am teaching the class, this is where I stop. And I actually make them think of everything they know in their field and how their solution or what they're trying to do could fit as many gaps as possible. I have an example here, and this is a good example of text that can be used to convince the reviewer that work needs to be done. As a result of the effectiveness of a new systemic agent for node-positive melanoma, guideline recommendations for its management are changing. We're setting up the field. This is what's going on. Surgical oncologists need education to remain up to date and recommendations on how best to care for their patients with node-positive melanoma. Seems like a simple, things are changing, this is what needs to happen. The rest of this grant talked about effective ways to train oncologists. So when I'm talking about writing a strong statement, it doesn't have to be difficult, it just needs to be clear. The evidence, we talked about before, you want to make sure you're using the most up-to-date evidence. A lot of times you're looking at statistics. I typically recommend that statistics should be within the last 3 years, if at all possible. The only reason it should be older is because this assessment hasn't been done. I wanted to look at an example here. So here are 3 different needs statements. And I'm not quite sure if we can do this interactive because I'm trying to go quickly so we're back on track. But just take a moment. I'm going to pause and drink a little bit of coffee. Think about these 3 different need statements. And if you could, in the chat, which one do you think is the strongest? So you're the reviewer in this case. If reading this, which one of these examples do you think is the best one? And I'll wait till maybe the first few respond in the chat before moving forward. We've got 1 vote for number 2. And for the sake of time, I'm going to say, you're right. What was convincing about this is that they had specific evidence. You're not being general. You are literally saying, this was what the rise was. It correlates to this. That's why we need to take action. The other 2 are great. They're grammatically correct, but they're a little bit more vague. So these are just different ideas for you to think of. And One of the best ways I think you can prepare yourself in making sure you're making the strongest story possible is to read other grants. Don't only read the funded grant, read a rejected grant. You learn the most from the bad examples. You see the mistakes as you're reading them. And once you can identify them, that's not as compelling, you can incorporate that into your own research. Being concise and precise is very important as well. So I have another 3 examples. I think it's pretty obvious just from the size of the first element, it's too long. It's got some great evidence, right? We want that evidence in there. It's definitely more specific than the second one, but oh my gosh, it's too long. The final one, that third element, takes the key parts of the element and summarizes it. When you're writing a grant, there's 2 trains of thought you can get on either train. The first one is to have your topic sentence. Sometimes they even bold it at the beginning of the paragraph. So you could say, while 10% of the European population lives with diabetes, only 58% comply with self-monitoring guidelines. Thus, new and effective solutions are needed to improve diabetic management and patient outcomes. Below that, you could go into detail on how you got those numbers. So you basically say, hey, here's the key point, and here's the evidence that supports that. The other train is to provide all the evidence and then have that bolded sentence, that key sentence, at the end of the paragraph. Whether it's at the beginning or at the end, that could be a matter of style. But having a paragraph that doesn't have that summary sentence that ties everything together, that's a bad idea. You're going to lose your audience. Typically, reviewers, like has been mentioned before, we're doing this in the evening and on the weekends. So make it easy on them. Help them remember what's going to happen. I like to always describe things in the paragraph above, have that bolded statement at the end that summarizes what I said, and then a beautiful image below it to really hit home so that the reviewer is clear about what I am saying. And that brings me to the end. These are the main elements I want you to remember, is that think about what your story is. Who is the antagonist? Who's the main character? Who's the villain in your story? How can you make this compelling? Make sure that you are answering as many whys as possible. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Tell me why you need to do it. The active voice, make sure your evidence is up to date. It's as concise as possible, and as has been mentioned before, send it around to as many colleagues as you can. Make sure that they are brutal. It is better for them to point it out than for the reviewer. And with that, this is where you can find me on LinkedIn. That should take you there. And I'm always happy to answer any questions then I can. I will stick around. I've really enjoyed listening to the first 2 lectures, and I'll be here till the end.
Thank you, Michelle. It was thank you for this presentation with all practical examples that will be important. We will reserve at the end question and queries for you. Okay.